Good morning. Like I just said, my name is John Marquez, and today I will be presenting my dissertation titled The Construction of Female Characters in C.S. Lewis's The Silver Chair. I will first present the author as well as some background information key for the development of this presentation. Then the theoretical framework and the concept of otherness will be introduced, as they are the basis of the deconstruction and analysis of the characters, which after that I will move on to the analysis of the female characters of the novel, which will encompass a description and breakdown of both the Lady of the Green Kirtle and Jill Pole, as well as an investigation of their relationship with spirituality and masculinity. Lastly, I will present my conclusions and suggestions for future studies or research. C.S. Lewis was a British writer and scholar that was born in Belfast in 1898. He was one of the scholars partaking in the informal Oxford literary group known as the Inklings, alongside many other famous writers. His fame skyrocketed because of his fantasy and fiction novels and stories such as the Chronicles of Narnia, yet his non-fiction Christian apologetics also granted him some recognition. Lewis had a spiritual and religious upbringing, which is reflected and foreseen in many of his writings and stories, where we can find very subtle religious morals or characters that mirror biblical personas. This influence ultimately led to the debate questioning Lewis's misogyny and sexism in his narratives. Which, speaking of sexism, regarding the hypostasis that women often fulfill in fantastic epic literature, these archetypes are very scarce, very stereotypical, and mostly submissive. Female characters have no bearing regarding classical heroism, and subsequently, female characters are stuck with subjugated and passive roles. There are 5 major roles in fantasy suited for women, which are these 5. The Holy Mother is the matriarchal typecast whose goodness and benevolence transform her into a moral advisor for the heroes. The Good Mother is another role that relies heavily on the hospitality of femininity, which they are mother-like figures who support and boost the protagonists. The Wise Woman and the Female Warrior are the hypostases or archetypes closer to classical heroism, yet their contributions rely on becoming friends and supporters of their masculine counterparts or protagonists. The female warrior could be or would be an archetype inside the wise woman, where the female warrior arguably assists in battles and fights, yet they are never considered part of the discourse. Apparently, all of the female visitors of Narnia are considered or fall under this term of the female warrior, and are considered female warriors. Jill Pole being of course the one in this book. Lastly, the Black Goddess is the basic villain of the narrative, whose evil and wickedness are excused because they exploit their femininity. The Lady of the Green Kirtle fulfills this role in the Silver Chair. So all of these hypostases diminish female characters and portray them outside the discourse as mere objects for the progression of other protagonists and never as the subject of the discourse. So we can say that, in simpler words, female characters are often visualized as otherness. Otherness, in case anybody doesn't know, is a concept employed by many theorists and scholars to explain the state of submissiveness or exclusion some groups undergo about a social binarism or dichotomies that determine what is considered or assumed as the one and what is the other. Simone de Beauvoir, for example, French philosopher and writer, coined this concept in her book, The Second Sex, where she specifically established the female position in society, literature, and history regarding otherness, where women are usually depicted and treated as the other, exclusively because they are feminine, emotional, passive, conquered, and wild. The female characters in the silver chair are the prime example of the exclusion and discrimination the female author suffers. On the one hand, we have the Lady of the Green Kettle as the brutish, tyrant witch that she resembles. She resembles the oppositional author who endangers this dichotomy and needs to be fought. She is a major risk for binarism as she is trying to establish herself as the one. On the other hand, we have Jill Paul, the only female heroine in the protagonist trio that tries to save Narnia. She is very reminiscent of the defective author that needs to be kept submissive and passive by the discourse so that she doesn't revolt or become the oppositional author. And that is why throughout the book, Jill gets diminished, belittled, and humiliated. So, having said that, we can start with the analysis of the characters, starting with the Lady of the Green Kettle, which is described as a seductress, a temptress, a woman of extreme beauty that holds the ability to enchant, allure, and brainwash male characters. She employs and abuses her femininity and beauty to achieve her goals and ambitions of becoming the headship of Narnia. This sinful exploitation of her beauty is transgressive as she uses sexuality to gain power over men, and therefore tries to establish herself as the one while disarranging the conformity of the binarism. That is why the hegemonic discourse pictures her as corrupt, immoral, and sinful, and the abuse of femininity is employed as a poor excuse for her dehumanization and demonization. So by the end of the story, the audience realizes that the Lady of the Green Kettle loses all sense of humanity when she becomes a monstrous serpent. Her identity is diminished even further to the point where she cannot keep her human form in the last scenes before her demise, or perish. She dies as a monster instead of as a human, highlighting the true perception of her character according to the discourse, which is a mere scaled monster that needs to be eradicated. When it comes to Jill Paul, even though she's introduced as the main protagonist of the story, her presence and identity as a female hinder her heroism and depiction. She is introduced as a childish character who is very indifferent about the task at hand, even though she is presented as the most crucial or more primary hero out of the three. She is the only one that sees and gets to spend time with Aslan, who in return explains the mission to her, teaches her designs, and spends time with her while helping Jill memorize the importance of the task to save Narnia. So the cruciality of this mission is explained very early on in the book or the novel. However, Jill just appears to be very indifferent about it or towards it throughout the story, as we can see that she stops remembering the signs at some points and even forgets them, which further evidences her weak determination as a hero. Her immaturity and inexperience are further proof of how corrupted her heroism is portrayed. Jill Paul is described with childish attributes for the entirety of the book. Her arrogance and selfishness, reminiscent of little girls, are highlighted and negatively showcased, as her immaturity and selfishness seem to be a consequence of her gender more than of her age. In fact, Eustace Crabbe, Eustace Crabbe, the other human protagonist that comes from the real world to save Narnia, while arguably being the same age, he is depicted as completely mature and thoughtful, unlike Jill. Additionally, these negative female traits become an obstacle and hardship for the rest of the characters, further exemplifying her dubious heroism. To top it all off, Jill perpetrates different activities or behaviors that amplify that feeling of immaturity and selfishness. So activities like falling asleep at crucial times or acting obstinately ultimately diminish her status as a hero who seems to not take the adventure seriously. Nevertheless, despite the book's attempt to demonize and humiliate both female characters, the most troubling aspect is the inclusion of spirituality and how it serves as an excuse to further belittle female characters and boost masculinity's superiority. Spirituality in this context is referred to as the relation or connection characters have with God. It seems fair to acknowledge that Aslan is the closest godlike or divine entity in Narnia. And so presumably, we can agree that the Silver Chair's female character's spirituality will be evaluated or measured according to this, depending on their relationship with Aslan. Therefore, Aslan, being the so obvious masculine individual that he is, we could argue that spirituality in this very context measures the degree of subjugation of female characters, subjugation of female characters regarding masculinity. So, for example, the Lady of the Green Kettle's spirituality is extremely corrupted and wicked, considering her ambitions of becoming a ruler dispute directly with Aslan's ideals. Her spirituality is a reflection of this rejection of masculinity. So that is why she doesn't approve of Aslan. She doesn't believe in his divinity or presence, which ultimately poisons her spirituality and ultimately demonizes and dehumanizes her. Additionally, this corrupt spirituality is physically witnessed in the book, in the realm in which she rules. The Lady of the Green Kettle, the Lady of the Green Kettle's domain is described as a miserable, dusty, and despairing scene, which automatically contrasts with the rest of Narnia, Aslan's sunny, cheerful, and warm domain. It is widely known that there are no corrupt or evil places in Narnia, and that it is merely because of her corrupt spirituality or wicked spirituality that her domain transforms into hell. This physical and spiritual delineation only amplifies the alienation and monstrification of this character. Jill Paul's spirituality, on the other hand, is completely disparate. Her spirituality does not vilify her, but it patronizes her as a little girl. As a human who arrives in Narnia to help Aslan, their relationship is very reminiscent or evocative of a parental or guardian hierarchy. Aslan protects and guides Jill through the adventure, like a father would supervise his daughter through trouble. Moreover, this hierarchy is completely visible in the novel, as Aslan refers to Jill as daughter, whereas Eustace and alike male characters are denominated son of Adam. This parental protection fully discloses Jill's inferiority regarding Aslan. Her passivity and subjugation to a father figure like Aslan does not allow Jill to evolve or develop as a proper hero. This passivity is also demonstrated when analyzing Jill's participation in battle and actions. Neither Aslan nor the discourse allows Jill to partake in any physical confrontations, highlighting her apathy and submission. She is not given a proper equipment to fight, and when given the chance to fight, she silently and submissively waits in a corner for the fight to end, while the male characters or the male heroes finish battling. Speaking of which, the male heroes that accompany Jill in this adventure is Eustace Crabbe and Puddleglum, have a better sewing and depiction than Jill, even though they are presented as more secondary characters compared to her. They are showcased as proper heroes that do take seriously the task, heroes that sacrifice themselves for the sake of succeeding, heroes that do not act or behave like obnoxious children. Not only that, but they are the two characters alongside the narrator that keep bringing up Jill's mishaps and problems. They ridicule Jill several times, reminded her how her past accidents and interruptions are obstructing and hindering their adventure. The discourse finds ways to diminish Jill's heroism and paint her as a terrible hero to the audience. As we have seen with her descriptions and behaviors, her parental hierarchy with Aslan, where she is implicitly on an inferior status, and to top it all off, this dynamicity where the other characters are portrayed or appear to be superior. Even though Jill is presented as the protagonist, the discourse always favors masculinity, and femininity is always pushed to an inferior secondary position that obstructs and hinders masculinity's progression. So, in conclusion, we can argue that the author's religious influence and stereotypical hypotheses indeed delineate and hinder the female characters in the Silver Chair, where they are either vilified or ridiculed merely by the fact that they are feminine. The discourse never poses either the Lady of the Green Kettle or Jill Pole as the subject of the story, but rather as the object to demonstrate masculinity superiority. Their identities as the other as further evidence of how they are never planned to succeed or redeem themselves. Additionally, spirituality is employed as another meaning to glorify masculinity while underestimating femininity. However, as this is not Jill Pole's only appearance in the series, I believe that further studying should be done in order to analyze both her appearances in this book and her behaviors in the book The Chronicles of Narnia, The Last Battle, and to compare both appearances and behaviors. Thank you very much.
Sorry, what was her last name?
Jill Pole.
Oh, sorry, yes. And her depiction of especially more childish and heroic than the other characters. Because when I think about Narnia, I always remember that for most of the books that have these child protagonists, there is at least always one misbehaving child. So for the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we have Edmund. And in that book, it's Lucy who has like the special connection with Aslan. And then for the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, of course, it's Eustace himself, who is a brat. He's arrogant, turns into a dragon, which I love. And then all these misbehaving children have growth. And in the next book, they are a different character. They found a way to deal with their faults, and they go from there and become new heroes with more the values that are more present in the other heroes that they are compared with. And my question was, how do you think this plays into Jill's evaluation, this deconstruction of Jill as being submissive, and because she is female, in the larger context of the series? And if Jill develops in the last book of the series, which especially the last ones, I didn't read so much, so I cannot remember actually. So thank you, it was very interesting.
Thank you for your question. I do agree with the fact that there is always a misbehaving child in every book, or in most of the books. And yeah, it is true that in the next book of the Silver Chair, which is The Last Battle, Jill does get an evolution and character development that truly shows how her inner heroism and actions. I do have to say that in this book, the misbehaving child type of conduct and progression seems to be more of, like I said, more like of her gender, more than of her age. So, for example, Eustace and the Pevensey from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Yes, they are misbehaving, but there's like this excuse of, they behave like this because they're children. And in this case, in Jill's case, the narrative and the discourse kind of like has this narrative of she's not behaving like this because she's a child, but because she's a female. I do have to say that, like I said, there's an evolution in the next book, and I do think that Eustace has this very great depiction in this book because of his last apparition in the previous book. So that's why I said that further studying or research should be done and compare how her heroism evolves in both books. I think if that answers your question.
Thank you, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ulysses and Marquez. I have a question for both. I learned a lot from your presentation. For Marquez, I was thinking about I think the last point you made about the transformation of the Lady of the Green Kirtle to a monster, right? And you're reading that as a dehumanization. I'm thinking if it's possible to read that transformation as from a kind of masculine sense as well. The monster as fearsome, the monster as, I don't know, that which creates anxiety in some ways. So I was wondering if that reading is also possible in this whole idea of the monster. And for Ulysses, I haven't read Barfield. It was really interesting. And I guess this is one of the things with theory, I guess all theory in some ways. So the question I have, and I liked your reading of Numa, the spirit and the encoding that you bring in. I'm wondering to what extent is Barfield's theorizing universalizing in some ways? Does it take? And I like that you bring in the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis at the end, because when we talk about ancient peoples and myth, what is he looking at this from a particularly Euro-Western lens? Is there a cultural context? Is it culturally responsive? His theorizing on myth is the question I have.
So thank you for your question. I have to say that the Lady of the Green Kirtle does really represent this. She's a very feminine, physically, a very feminine character, but she does have these masculine attributes, masculine quote unquote attributes, because she's brutish, she's a tyrant, she's powerful, and I do think that these masculine attributes and her dehumanization are very correlated, because her ultimate dehumanization, like the epitome of that dehumanization, happens because of how her masculine attributes are, like I said, are like a danger for the dichotomies or the binarism, because she's trying to establish herself as the one while being the other. She's like taking attributes from the one and making them their own. That's why I think that her last scenes as this serpent are both like a consequence of her dehumanization and her masculinity.